What's up, basketball coaches, players, and fans? Welcome to the Pass First podcast, where we share our knowledge of the game. My name is Alex Engel, and I'm here with my partner, Augie Johnston. We hope you're able to take something away from today's episode that will help you on your basketball journey. Today, we're going to be talking about how to become an elite on-ball defender. We'll be talking about some of the characteristics that you need, how to develop your abilities to become a better defender, and just anything else related to on-ball defense. If you've been listening to us on iTunes, on Spotify, or following us on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. So without further ado, let's get right into today's episode. All right, welcome in everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Today, as we talked about earlier, we're going to be covering the characteristics and just everything related to being a good on-ball defender. So today, let's start off with those characteristics. Augie, what would you consider some of the characteristics of an elite or high-level on-ball defender?
Yeah, I think this is a rabbit hole that we could definitely dive down and talk about a lot of different things. But to simplify the whole thing, an elite, and we're talking elite, like a great on-ball defender is somebody that can put pressure on the ball and have a lot of pressure on the ball, as well as stay in front of their man at all times. Those two things, I think, don't go hand in hand. And me as a coach, I remember starting off being, hey, pressure, pressure, pressure. And then kind of transforming to, hey, just keep your man in front of you. And so now we have a philosophy where we say we only want the other team shooting contested mid-range pull-ups, like basically. So that's staying in front, right? Not getting beat to the basket, and then also contesting all shots. But yeah, those two things, a lot of pressure and staying in front.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would say are two of the main things as well. I would say maybe an elite on-ball defender could also just be disruptive with like in passing lanes, like, as far as getting a pass off. I know that kind of falls into off-ball defense at times, but, disrupting the person making a pass, right? And then just kind of making them uncomfortable in general. I guess that kind of ties into pressure, but just making them uncomfortable. A lot of people would say an elite on-ball defender is someone who can turn the offensive player multiple times. Like you'll hear a coach, if you see someone pick up full court, you'll hear a coach say, turn him, and they want them to make that offensive player turn a few times. So I think that might be another attribute if you can slow someone down, because especially if you're guarding like a point guard from another team, you can really disrupt their offense. And if your shot clock's, 30 seconds, and now they don't even start their offense until 17 or 18, you just ate away almost half of the possession. I think that's another thing that on-ball defenders can really do.
Yeah, and just in talking about turning a player, I think that's huge. Like you said, it's disruptive, and a lot of times it'll take teams out of their offense. They won't even be able to get into their offense. I mean, you mentioned that too. But also, it does other things too, like as far as if you can get that player to pick up his dribble. I mean, we're talking about youth and high school level, maybe not at college. You're not going to pressure somebody into picking up their dribble as easily. It'll happen. But I know at the youth level, even like we're talking about middle school and down, if you can turn somebody like even just twice in the backcourt, they're probably going to pick up their dribble. And I mean, one whole strategy is just to not make the point guard bring it up, So if you can turn them, make them give it up, that's disruptive in itself there, not just in not allowing them to get into their offense, but now everybody's in different spots. Now they're trying to run a play that, and you know how it is when you try to run a play and everyone's in a spot they're not supposed to be in, someone's going to mess up. So, yeah, I think that's huge. On-ball defense, picking up full court. I personally love point guards that do that. And back in the day, I didn't, because I didn't understand that what it did. I was always like, why pick them up full court? Like, he's just eventually getting across half court and they're getting into their offense and they're playing. What's the point? But you pick up, 20 times full court in a game. You get him to pick up his dribble 3 times. You get, them to get out of their offense 4 times. You've caused, 2 turnovers. Like, that's a game changer in itself.
Mm-hmm. And I think it does a lot of things like you just mentioned that maybe don't always show up in the stat sheet. Like, yeah, you only get, someone could look at that, and I think maybe a casual person would look at that and be like, oh, you picked him up 30 times, you only turned over twice. Like, that's not a good return on investment, right? But if you really know the game, you're like you said, well, okay, how many times did we disrupt their offense? How many times did we just make him feel uncomfortable so that now when he is in the half court, he still feels uncomfortable? Because that's the thing, is a lot of times in basketball, it's about your feel. If you're feeling good and you feel like you've got a good rhythm and flow and you can move freely, you're probably going to be more of a threat on offense. If you feel like you're disruptive or every time you make a step, it's like uncomfortable, or like, you take 4 steps and someone's bumping you the whole time, it's just, it can throw you off your game. I guess probably really, really great players know, but most players are not really, really great players. So it's going to disrupt you to the point where it can affect the not only yourself but the entire team. So I do agree with that. I also think even at the high school and college level, you said yeah, you're not going to pick it up as likely, but it still happens. I was always surprised how many times you could see a guy get kind of nervous, all of a sudden pick up their dribble, or if you had someone funneling in one direction or the other, and maybe a trap came, and all of a sudden they pick up their dribble. So there are a lot of benefits of having a point guard that can pick someone up from 94 feet.
Yeah, and as far as characteristics go, I mean, you have to have certain characteristics to even be able to do that. For myself, as not the quickest player on the court, I remember picking up full court. I could do it, and I was never afraid to do it. But I always, and this is something my dad always used to tell me, like, hey, if you're guarding one of those quick, like super quick guys, like just give him a foot, give him a foot. And so I think also another characteristic could just be like intelligent, being smart with your on-ball defense and knowing your limits and knowing just, like I said, knowing your limits and giving them space, or maybe understanding where the help defense is and funneling them towards the help defense. So there's definitely an intelligent side too to picking up full court, and one that probably is not taught very often. I don't hear too many times coaches saying, hey, give them a foot, but for me personally as a player, I found that to be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that IQ side can tie into more than just picking up full court. I think I would take it a step further. I think characteristics of a really good on-ball defender are, one, they're smart. Like you said, they know how to play within themselves. But something that may be contradictory to what a lot of coaches will say is you'll hear coaches always say, like, don't gamble, never gamble, right? And I say it all the time as well. But elite on-ball defenders, they know when to gamble and when not to. And that's, to me, is what separates them. Because a bad on-ball defender, they gamble all the time because they just don't know any better. And a good one can pick maybe the 2 to 3 times a game, or maybe it's a little more sometimes, but 2 to 5 times a game where they know they can lunge and get a steal that's coming by, in the passing lane, or pick someone's pocket. And that's where you get those turnovers. I think that's another characteristic that I don't even know if you can teach that. I think it's kind of like instinct in a way. It's just from playing a lot, or maybe some people just naturally react quicker than others. But that, I think, is another thing that you can tie in there as well to characteristics.
Yeah, it's basically anticipation, right? They have good anticipation. But yeah, I agree with that.
I also think one other thing before we move on to the next part here is depending on how you are like your physical build can change your characteristics. If, like you said, if you're a real small player, you're a guard under 6 foot, you're probably going to be really quick. You pretty much have to be really quick if you're going to be an elite on-ball defender, because you don't have the size to block shots or probably contest shots the same way as if you're like a 6'6", 6'7" wing. You maybe don't need to be quite as quick, but if you have length, and you've got like a 6'8" wingspan or 6'9" wingspan, you can contest shots. You can even give a little more space, like you said, and still be a disruptive defender. So I think that's one other thing, but obviously that's just based off of your genetics. You can't really do a whole lot to control that. So
yeah.
Go ahead. I don't know if you had something else.
Oh, I was just gonna say the last thing I would say is understanding, and this goes with being smart too, is like smelling blood, right? If you are a good lockdown defender and you're matched up on and all of a sudden the ball swings to the 3-man and he's got to bring it up full court, like being able to smell that blood and lock in and pick up and be like, okay, this time I can actually pressure this guy and turn him is probably another good characteristic to have.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, yeah, that ties into your IQ there, but absolutely knowing who you're guarding at all times is very
personnel,
important.
Yeah, knowing your personnel, definitely.
Right. Okay. Let's then move on to the next part. Have you ever either coached or played with someone that you would say was a really elite on-ball defender?
Yeah. In these episodes, I talk a lot about one of my college point guards. He was a little 5'9" guy who his job was to pick up full court. And off the top of my head, I mean, as far as on-ball goes, he was definitely one of them. At this point, we've only talked about picking up full court a lot too, because we don't want to kind of shine over the part of just being a great half-court on-ball defender, which is as equally, if not more important, being able to, shade guys and send them to where you want to send them and stay in front and contest all shots and that kind of stuff. But I definitely would go back to him being able to pick up full court, turn his guy a bunch of times, never get tired. But as far as another player, I can think of a player on my high school team. I don't know if I would say he's an elite defender, but he's definitely one that understands how to play defense, and he's a smart defender as far as, we're forcing baseline. If you try to take him middle, he'll get there and take that charge, like that on-ball charge. He can this isn't really on-ball, but help side, he's always flying over to take charges and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I definitely, when I think of defense and someone I've played with, I always think of one of my college point guards.
Okay. Yeah, and for me, I would say at least playing wise, there were two players that really stood out in my mind. One of them was when I was at JUCO. A teammate of mine, his name was Phil Jimenez, and was like a 6-foot guard, but kind of a little stockier build, and just was kind of like a dog on defense. He just would track people. Was really good with first off, very physical. Yeah, and that I think maybe is another attribute we forgot to mention is I think really good on-ball defenders are pretty physical, but they know how to be physical without necessarily fouling all the time, right? And he was very, very physical player, wasn't afraid of anybody. Just, pretty quick feet, especially for his size, like pretty quick feet, very strong. He was like a former actually football player. He played a year of college football first. And so just kind of had that like football toughness to him. And he was a really good defender. We actually played at the time James Ennis, who I think is still in the NBA. I don't know if he is. He was in the NBA for a while. I believe still is. He was like one of the best players in the league, obviously at JUCO. And Phil was a couple of the games where we played him, just literally guarded him 94 feet, where like even if he didn't have the ball, was just fully in him the whole time. And he actually pissed off James Ennis so bad that he got double tacked and got thrown out the game.
Jeez.
We beat him by like 30. And that's an NBA guy, so like he was a guy that to me was an elite defender. And then I had a teammate at Menlo, my other teammate, Nick McCullough, who ended up being the defensive MVP for the league, who was more of like a post player. And we didn't really cover that too much, but he was a 4-man that could kind of move more like a wing, and just really good, could guard on the wing, could guard on the perimeter, could guard inside. Not picking up people 94 feet, but just like you said, that half-court defense was really high IQ and could lock in. So those are two guys for me that I thought of. And I think a lot of times people forget that it's not just perimeter defense. You could be a great defender on the inside, and a lot of times people think of on-ball defense, especially inside, I think of as blocking shots. And it's not necessarily that, right? It could be contesting shots or getting people out of the post, not letting people get positioned. Those are all attributes of elite on-ball defenders as well. So yeah, those are two that I would think of. But okay, so let's talk about the mentality. Yeah, I know we covered it a little bit, but what type of mentality do you need to have if you want to be this elite on-ball defender?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is you have to convince yourself, and you have to take that as part of your identity. The best defenders are always the ones that are everyone on the team knows they're the defender on the team and stuff like that. But why can't everybody have that mentality, right? Why can't everybody say hey, I'm a lockdown defender, that's what I do, But if you make that part of your identity and what you do, I think that's going to help you a lot more, because you'll hold yourself more accountable. You have higher standards for yourself in that category. So definitely that. And also, just it's the grit, right? It's the hard-nosed players that are always the ones that are the best defenders. So just having that grit that no matter what, you're not going to get scored on. You're willing to exhaust yourself on the defensive end, are two things that come to mind.
And I think that because defense is not as glamorous, you said why can't everybody have that, right? A defense, it's not glamorous, right? It's tiring. It takes a lot of effort. You may not get all the love and show, in the stat sheet. Yeah, okay, you can get steals and blocks, but you're only going to get so many of those a game. So it's definitely not a glamorous thing. And most people, when they think of basketball, think about scoring. So you have to have definitely have to have a certain mentality in order to do that. I agree with that. I think, like you said, that toughness, that willing to play physical, that willing to get under another player's skin, to be irritating, to be annoying, to be disliked. My favorite players were guys that if you think about it, you hated playing against, but you loved having them on your team. Yeah, that to me was like a description of a guy that was a great defender. You don't like playing against him, but you would love to have him on your team. So yeah, just kind of all those attributes all tied together. But it's not super common. And again, I don't know if that's just something that maybe you go through just as you go through life or playing basketball, you develop that identity. I don't know if there's a recipe for developing that identity, because I think if there was, everybody would be doing it. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Like, is that something you just kind of learn as you go through life, and maybe it's how you grew up or how you were taught to play basketball, or what do you think?
I think for a lot of players, they can't find a lot of success in other categories, and so they can find success in defense because, like, I wouldn't say a lot of people say defense is all heart. It's not all heart, right? There's ability, there's technique, there's all kinds of stuff, but a lot of it is your mentality and a lot of it is your heart. So if you want to say it's 50% heart, I would definitely agree with that at least. So, you're not a great shooter. How are you going to get on the court? You're not a great passer. You're not great anything on the offensive end. You can kind of fall into that defensive player category and get playing time. And, there's nothing better as a coach than be like, oh man, we got to play this team. They got this guy. He's going D1. He's going to drop 30 on us. He's been dropping 30 on everybody. But you're like, oh, it's a luxury to just be like, oh, I'll just put blank on him, and you just put blank on him the whole game. Kind of like what you described on your JC team. Like, if you have that luxury that you can just take a guy who's dropping 30 on everyone and shut him down to like under 10, then yeah, like that's pretty valuable to have that on your team. So there is a place for players like that. But I would say as a player, you never want to pigeonhole yourself to say, oh, all I do is defense. That's what I do. Because although most coaches say it, oh, the best defenders will play, the truth is that that's not really the case.
Yeah, and I think we said this maybe a few episodes ago. We were talking about that and how defense can help get you on the court, but you still have to have a little more to stay on the court or to get a starting position. And a lot of times those lockdown defenders, like if that's all they can do, they're probably going to be like a sixth man or seventh man, who can come in and fill a spot, let a starter get some rest, but then hold the status quo, right? You're not going to lose out on anything having that sub in, because they're going to lock down and they're probably not going to hopefully not make any bad mistakes on offense. But it's hard to just be a pure, I'd almost say it's almost impossible to be a player that only plays defense and cannot score, or barely can score at all, because you still have to have some offensive production. And we, I think, also said this as well. Even the best defenders in the NBA, those were guys that were averaging 20 or 25 in high school, at least, probably higher. It's not like they were only defenders the entire time. It's just they got to the NBA, and now in the NBA, their skills are not quite where, they are as an offensive threat. So now they found their role as just a lockdown guy.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Okay. So now let's talk about some techniques for guarding the ball. And people listening or watching, maybe you already know all these, but what do you think of as far as how should you position yourself? Just the little basics that you're taught. What would you say are some of those basic techniques?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about a little more abstract. Not, I guess they fall under technique, but not as like as far as like where the foot should be placed and stuff. But for me, being in someone's bubble when you're on ball is the technique that I expect my players to do. Meaning, let's talk about half court. I don't want them to have the ball in the wing. You're saying, oh, I can't get beat. The rule is I have to make them shoot a contested jumper off the dribble. I can't get beat to the basket. So I'm going to give them all this space. Like, that's okay. We don't want you to get beat, but you have to be in his bubble, because we don't want people just to be able to pass freely, because that's what you're giving up, right? You might not be giving up a drive, but now you're giving them the ability to pass to a cutter very easily. So that's the first thing I would say is to be in someone's bubble. That meaning just putting enough pressure on the ball to where they feel you. And, they can't just, like I said, make any decision they want. Another thing I would say, and another tip for being in someone's bubble is I teach stick hand. So I like to have my hand out almost straight ahead, just to help eat up that space, apply a little bit more pressure with a stick hand instead of maybe like a dig hand, like down low. So one hand sticking straight towards the ball, being disruptive, swiping at the ball up. And then the other thing that's a little bit more abstract would be guard a yard. So a lot of people have heard this before, but the misconception is that you need to guard a yard, like I guess vertically, but it's really guard a yard horizontally. So be able to guard a yard to your right and be able to guard a yard to your left. And if they're able to dribble, past you, going outside of that parameter, a yard to the right, a yard to the left, then I'm okay with that, because in the half court, then they're going to have to take multiple dribbles, right? What I hate is the the straight line drive, right? When you're playing defense and you give up a straight line drive where they're able to take just one dribble and get to the basket and get a layup, because a lot of times there's no help. The help is late. But if you can guard a yard and make them dribble 2 times, like it'll take them 2 times if in that situation, because they got to go around, we can have help. You'll still be with them. You're not getting blown by. You still have a presence there. So those are just the 2 things before I ramble for too long that I can think of.
Okay, and when you were talking about the stick hand, do you mean one out is the other hand passing lane? If you're doing that like that, is that how you have it set up, or how do you have what's the opposite hand doing?
Yeah, so I guess if the person with the ball has it, let's say in their right hand, then my left hand would be stick hand out, and then my right hand would be up in the passing lane. Yeah.
Okay.
So I like to have, it's just normal technique. I also teach, one hand up in the passing lane, one hand is my stick hand, and then when they and let me think if I have that backwards. I guess I do
Because
have
if
that
it,
backwards. Yeah, I do have that backwards. So if they had their ball in the right hand, then it would be my left hand would be up in the passing lane. My right hand would be straight out stick hand.
okay.
So when they do, we're just talking about full court now. If they were to cross over to their left hand, I like to teach swinging your arms through to help you change directions, and then keeping that stick hand there.
Okay, so it's basically the same style as a normal. I mean, what I would think of as quote unquote normal defense, which is passing lane, and then the other hand is kind of that dig. But you're just turning the hand over and more like kind of reaching out with it. I see what you're saying. Okay,
Yeah,
so
and
it's
also
the same thing.
I'm talking to just even in like in the half court. If I was to like close out on somebody, I would
Hmm.
want to have my hands out in disrupting the ball. It's the same thing as having it down low too in a way, but that's kind of like the barrier or the distance that I think is good to be guarding somebody. I don't want you chest up on him because he's just going to, roll right off you. I don't want you
Hmm.
so far back that there's no pressure. I want you close enough to where if he was to drive, you're far enough back, you can move your feet, cut that off. But also that stick hand, I think, helps close that gap a little bit and apply a little bit more pressure.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty traditional. Is to say, what is it? Arm's length away.
Yeah,
That's a pretty traditional
exactly.
length to stay in. And really good defenders, on ball defenders, can probably close that gap a little bit because they're really quick. But yeah, that's a pretty traditional one there. Some other things that came to mind is, and I guess this depends on how you want to guard, but I'm going to assume we're talking here driving people baseline because that's what I think most coaches like to teach. So for me, the stance is important, right? So you want to have that 45-degree angle. So you're forcing them that one direction. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with is either they're straight up and they're squared shoulders, and then it's like you're giving them either way to go, or they open up so much. It's like they're almost like a 90-degree turn where they're completely open or at least closer to that. And then the defender, like you said, gets that straight line drive. So understanding the angles and that 90-degree angle and being like, okay, yeah, sure, you can maybe get by me going to the baseline, but it's going to take you 8 dribbles. And by the time you're down there, you're not in the spot to score. Um, and I thought that was a good point that you said that, yeah, I'm okay with you trying to dribble around me as long as you're going to go way around me, because like you said, the court's going to be cluttered. It's going to be really, it's going to make the court like they're going to run into defense. They're going to run into help, when they have to take that many dribbles and take those really wide angles. You just don't want super straight line drives. So I'm just trying to think of any other characteristics while you're talking, but I thought of definitely the footwork, or sorry, techniques, not characteristics. Definitely the footwork. You said hands in the passing lane. One other thing that technique wise would just be talking. I know this is not a physical technique, but I think it's something that's important. It's for any defender, but especially on ball defender, is being able to call, hey, ball, 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 or whatever, or talking to your teammates. Because I think, again, that can be disruptive as well. Yeah, maybe not for a really good defender, but some players get intimidated by that. If you're, that if someone's up in you and they're like, ball, 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 they're all over you, jumping on you, like it's a little more intimidating than if someone's just really passive, just standing there, like, yeah, like I said, a good defender probably won't be too disruptive, but or I said a good offensive player probably won't be too disruptive, but ones that are maybe a little shaky, they'll start losing the ball and fumbling it around.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's another thing of defense too. And maybe it comes with mentality, but there's a lot you can do with your voice and a lot you can do with in help side. I mean, if you're early to help and you're not late, then no one's going to drive down there, like that's preventative. So, I mean, that's not exactly, you're not doing anything. You haven't, jumped onto the ball or played any on-ball defense at that point. You're just there early, but it's preventative stuff that you can do. As far as other techniques, one technique that we haven't talked about is like walling up. So like, I don't know if you watch basketball, you'll notice that there's a lot of hand checking and stuff that happens, right? So, one technique that I see some coaches teaching, I don't know how I feel about it as far as me teaching it, because it's a foul, but it seems like it never gets called. And that's like when you try to drive by somebody and then that hand goes and kind of like hooks the hip. I can't really explain. It's hard to say, but like imagine driving by somebody and you feel like you're being held a little bit. It's because they have that one hand's up and then the other hand is down there kind of hooking that hip. And that's a technique that I do see some coaches teaching, and I don't see a lot of refs calling. So I always wonder if maybe I should teach my players to do that. At this point, I've only mentioned it a few times, but anyways, walling up, as far as that hand checking stuff's all good, but there comes a point to when you're basically chest to chest with the person you're guarding, and at that point you have to go no hands. You have to wall up, use your chest, no hands, show both hands high. And so that's another technique that came to mind, was that wall up. And in the post, the way that I teach post defense is to use an arm bar and give them as much space as possible, be as far back as you can, because you don't want them to spin off you. And then as soon as they put the ball down and start to dribble, release that arm bar and wall up on them and try to put your chest on them and get the hands straight up. Is kind of another technique that I teach just for post D. But I had another technique I was going to mention. I guess we'll talk about it. It just came to mind, but we can talk about when we talk about misconceptions in a bit.
Okay, and I think walling up is actually a very it's very valuable, and I think in a lot of ways players undervalue it, because that everybody wants to be a shot blocker, even if they're have no ability to do so. But it never ceases to amaze me how often a guy will even get to his spot, but then someone will wall up and put their hands straight up, and they may not even be as tall. It may be someone that's a little smaller than them, but it's just so disruptive because it makes you feel uncomfortable because someone's right in your space, and then they'll take that shot, even if it's like a 6-8 foot shot, and they just clank, and it's like, wow, it happens so often when I see it. And then you have the opposite side where they'll get in there, they'll give a little fake, and then the guy leaves his feet, and now you got a foul, right? And I think most coaches that I've talked to and have told me, they said the best place to block a shot is actually coming from the help side. It's not necessarily the on-ball defender. Like sometimes, yeah, but a lot of times the on-ball defender is the one that's going to get off their feet and they're going to get a foul. And it's that weak side defender coming across that, the offensive player doesn't see. That's where you're going to block shots. So if you are on ball, I'm a big fan of, wall up. Okay, if they make a tough shot, they make a tough shot. But I'm betting that if we do that 40 times in the game, they're probably not going to make 20 of them. They're probably going to shoot 10 of them they're going to make, and they're going to be shooting 25%. And I can live with 25%. But it's getting players to buy into that because everybody wants to be it's just natural instinct.
Just instinct, yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to break that. So that was the only other thing I was going to add in there, unless you had any other ones.
No, the last thing I'll just mention is that I've actually played on a team when I was playing overseas where we weren't even allowed to block shots. So we got really good at walling up, and in the end, I mean, it was hard, and there was games where I would be frustrated with that, but looking back on it, like, it's a really good principle to have. Like, I mean, it's kind of a black and white thing, but I mean, in coaching, it sometimes is like that, right? You have to make these rules where, like, it's not, we only feel like that in like 75% of the cases, but without that rule, then everybody's gonna be jumping to block shots. So it helps when rebounding a ton too, because you're in position to rebound. And it kind of reminded me of like in high school when I would always try to take charges, and I wouldn't get them a lot of times. They wouldn't call it, but they would never make the shot. Like, there's something about like jumping around somebody or whatever that just makes it so hard to make the shot. So I definitely will have to think about if I want to implement that rule myself for no jumping to block shots, because like we're not a tall team this year, so it might work.
And actually, while you were talking, I thought of one last technique is closeouts, right? So ball gets swung to your player, and then being able to close out, chop your feet. And again, I would say that same 45-degree angle, you want to try and push them whichever direction your coach wants you to push them. But being able to close out and then quickly move your feet, because normally that's where people get beat, is the ball gets swung, it's a closeout, and now they're catching and ripping and attacking. If you've got good technique, you can limit the amount that they can get by you, and again, push them way out, or maybe even stop them completely. So that was just one other thing that I wanted to throw in there as well. So.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so let's talk about how to improve your on-ball defense. We've talked about, some of it, a lot of it is heart and mentality. I agree with that, but there is also technique, and there are ways to improve. So what are some ways that you can think of that you can improve your on-ball defense?
Yeah, the first thing I would think of is just like improving your lateral movement. That's a huge characteristic, is having quick lateral movement. I mean, if we went out with 10 players right now, we could just do probably 1 or 2 drills and figure out who has the quickest lateral movement. And it might not be the player who's the fastest player or the quickest player on the court. So, any kind of agility drills, doing lateral quickness stuff, I think is huge. I guess I'll just give one example, even just like lane line to lane line, defensive slides back and forth, 20 seconds, setting up some cones, doing some defensive slides in there. So I think those are some ways. Also, improving your footwork. Like on defense, right, you can't really have a misstep. If you take a misstep in the wrong direction, you're getting blown by. So just making sure your footwork is dialed in and you're not, bringing your feet together, those kind of things. But yeah, I think footwork and working on your lateral quickness.
Yeah, and with footwork, one of my coaches talked a lot about what he would call a positive step. So the ability to like go one direction and stop, and then immediately take a step back the other direction, with that foot, as opposed to a lot of people, they'll go and then they'll kind of like round off or like tangle their feet, before they come back, if they don't know how to step correctly. And people do it too when they're running. This idea of a positive step just doesn't apply to defense. It applies to running as well, because if you see someone running like a liner, a lot of times they'll touch the line and then they'll do like a 1-2 step and then run back the other way. You know what I'm talking about? Where in reality, it's so much quicker just to touch the line and step back with the other foot. But a lot of people, I don't know, it's not natural. Maybe it's just because as kids, nobody gets taught that. But I think, yeah, that's definitely part of it. I think also being comfortable getting down in a defensive stance, as much as people, probably don't like the idea of this, but doing wall sits, being able to sit low in a defensive stance for long periods. I don't know that necessarily, doing a wall sit is going to make you a great defender, right? But I think doing a wall sit and being able to stay low will make you more comfortable in the game, because that's something that I see a lot as kids come out of their stances all the time, and you see it even at the college NBA level, probably, that guys just are not comfortable in that stance. And so they come up out of it because they're tired or whatever it is. And now it's way easier to get by you. So just something else, that I think you can work on by strengthening your legs, doing that type of techniques. I think you already talked about it, drills. There's lots of different drills you can do. Like you said, lane lines, you could do the zigzag drill, the basic one where someone's guarding you, the zigzag drill. I actually kind of like that drill, and I like because you can go at half court and then go full. And I think that's another great way to work on your defense, is just playing one-on-one, basically. You get as much as we talked about the offensive side, you can get a lot of the defensive side, because it's just you and him on an island, or if it's girls, just you and her on an island, and you've got to either play defense or you don't, right? And you get scored on. So I think that's another way that you can incorporate it into working on those drills that you do in maybe practice or on your own, and then you can try it live in a one-on-one situation.
Yeah, I think out of all the drills you can do to improve your defense, there's nothing that's going to beat just live full court one-on-one. You got to be full court. Probably the best way to do it for me, and the way I like to do it, is like restricted areas, like not just the whole court, because that's not really game realistic. So just kind of like restrict maybe whatever, it's half the court. It's one-on-one. You got to pick up. You got to, there's other cool little games too, where you can do like, okay, offense, if you score, you get a point. Defense, if you can turn them twice in the backcourt, you get a point. So every single time, whether you're on offense or defense, you're trying to get a point. And yeah, just, with that restricted area, it's hard for the offensive player to not get turned twice. And so it's not just like the offensive player going through the motions. They're trying to get that straight line drive and beat them. And the defensive guy, you just got to use your brains. You got to give them enough space. You got to have the right footwork to turn them. And then, I think that's probably, in my opinion, like the best drill to improve at least your full court pickup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another one that came to mind while you were talking about that was, there was one I did in college where the offensive player had the ball, and I don't remember exactly where they were. They were probably like around the 3-point line, maybe a little bit behind. So they had a little bit of space to get a head start, but not like a huge amount. And then the defender would be planted like right at the free throw line. And the goal was like, you can't let them in the paint. And so they would get like 1 or 2 dribbles, but they had to stay within that lane line, obviously. Like they couldn't go outside of the lane lines vertically. And so they would be dribbling at you, with however fast they could get, but you had to cut them off and bump them and keep them from getting in the paint. And if they got in the paint, you were kicked out, and I think you got a point if you were on defense. So if you stopped them, you got a point. Otherwise, if you didn't stop them, you had to go to the end of the line, and the next person stepped up and they got a chance to be on defense. So I thought that was kind of a cool one. It definitely was beneficial for like guards that were low and could just kind of push people out, but there probably was some value in that as well. It's just another one.
Yeah. The more we're talking right now about this, the more this makes me want to like start every single practice with full court one-on-one, because we do want to pick up full court. Like that's going to be whether we have a season or not this year. I mean, we going into next year too, we are going to pick up full court and try to turn people and yeah, I mean, that should be a daily vitamin for us, like, all right, bring it in. You guys ready? All right, let's start practice. Here it comes. Full court pickup, like get better at this every day, because here it comes. We're going to be doing this because across the board, I mean, we need everybody to be able to do it if we're going to actually be able to successfully play full court man, because the way that we're going to do it is, if the other team gets the rebound and we're on defense now, that's you're picking up full court right now. We don't really have a traditional 5, so we can do that across the board.
Yeah. And I think too, it depends on obviously, like you said, your personnel. So for you guys, where you have a team like that, if you can get everybody to do it, that can be really effective, because you can, no matter who you sub in or whatever, it doesn't matter. My team, I do have a couple more traditional posts, so it'd be a little tougher for me, but you could still get most of your guards and wings to do that. And if you have, a handful of players that can do it, also makes it more effective when you need to sub people in and out, because, you can constantly keep pressure on the other team. So, okay. So we talked about improvements. Let's get to the last topic here. What are some of the misconceptions about being a good on-ball defender? I know we talked about this a little earlier off the camera, but what are some of the ones that come to mind when you think of misconceptions?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and finally reveal the big reveal of what I was talking about earlier. This you might disagree with this, and this is something that I've thought about for a long time, but I think crossing your feet is a big misconception. You're told, I think, growing up a lot, to never cross your feet on defense. But from what I've found and from what I've seen is, if let's just say picking up full court, we're talking about full court here anyways. If I slide my feet and turn somebody, like, it's going to be pretty hard for me not to do a crossover step, sprint, and cut him off again. Like it'd be pretty hard for me to cut him off. He wraps it around his back real quick, and then to do like a drop step and then slide and get in front of him again. Right. What I teach is, and we work on this a lot when we're doing like just like full court 1-on-0 zigzags, no offense, is just, let's just say you're in the corner, you slide to the elbow, slide, touch there. That's basically the point that we're saying, okay, you cut him off, and to turn, do a big crossover step, sprint, and then try to cut him off again, try to get back into a defensive stance in front of him. So the way the drill works for us is we turn, we sprint. Once we get to that same sideline we started on, we plant, we get square, try to square him up and turn him again. Now we're sliding with him, playing defense, cut him off, crossover step, turn. So I think that's number one. One of the first misconceptions that comes to mind is you can never cross your feet.
And I don't disagree with you. I know you thought I might disagree with you, but the reason I don't is because I would not consider that, to me, that's not crossing your feet. I think crossing your feet, I mean, I know that it technically is, but crossing your feet to me is like when you're in the slide motion, right? Like you don't want to click your heels and cross your feet when you're in the slide motion, but we do the same thing. I mean, Coach Blair teaches the same thing at Cuesta, that when you get beat, we call it a sprint step. Someone beats you, you're not going to be able to slide and catch up. You have to turn and go full sprint and jump back in front, and then you're back in the slide motion. But that, at least to me, that's not what I think of when I think of crossing my feet. I think of, sliding, and your feet are like all tangled up. Then that's where you get crossed bad, right? So, yeah, I do agree with you, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe most coaches would think that's crossing your feet. But all the ones that I've played for, it seems like they've said no. Like, yeah, of course you've got to sprint, because if they're running full speed, like you can't slide like that. There's just no way. So yeah, I agree with you on that one. And then a couple other things that came to mind were statistics don't necessarily make you a good defender. What I mean by that is steals, like getting a bunch of steals. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a great defender. I'm not saying it means you're a bad defender, but you'll see guys that lead the league in steals in the NBA, and they're not the best defenders in the league necessarily every year, or at other levels, or even blocking shots. Like, and the reason I say that is because if you're a defender and you jump for everything, right, and you block 4 shots a game, let's say, but you get a bunch of fouls and you give up other easy baskets because you're constantly leaving your feet, and then you have another guy who's averaging 1 block a game, but they basically almost wall up every single time, and the offensive players are shooting like 25% against them. That guy's a better player. He's a better defender. He's limiting the amount of good shots the other team gets. And the guy who's averaging 4 blocks a game, he might not be a great defender. He might just be a guy who leaps for everything, you know? Same with the person who gets a bunch of steals. They need to be someone who lunges all the time, you know, and their coach lets them get away with that. But they're not necessarily a lockdown defender. I think at the end of the day, you really want low percentage shots. That to me are the characteristics of an elite defender. If you can cause the other team to take low percentage shots consistently and you can disrupt them, that to me are the main things that I'm looking for. And I think a lot of times people get caught up in like, oh, who's the best shot blocker? Who's the best, you know, person who gets steals? Can that tie in? Sure. I'm not going to say it never does, but I just think it can be misleading sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had players on my teams in the past where they do get a lot of steals, but they gamble too much. You know, it's like the only reason they get those steals because they gamble, and um, and yeah, I would much rather have a player be more solid, make the other team shoot contested jumpers off the dribble, and stay in front of their man. I think to me it's more valuable. But at the same time, I do see where you know, getting steals and stuff is important too, because of the fact that it creates you know, high percentage shots for your team, right? Everyone talking about turn defense into offense. So how do you do that? Well, a lot of times by getting steals, but that should be more on like you forcing the other team into a bad spot because you did cut them off or you did make them pick up their dribble, and now we should get into that steal mode. Not just like, to me it's like, okay, the other team's coming down, we're on defense, like we're just playing it safe right now. You know, it's like, all right, everybody, let's lock in, like let's make them take a bad shot here. As soon as they get into like they pick up their dribble, right, that's when then everybody needs to, like, you know, jump out, start denying their man, and that's when we can go for those steals.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's people listening that are going to be like, well, I know guys that are really good at picking up and, you know, and picking people's pockets and doing this and, you know, doing everything basically that I'm saying, but being the exact opposite. And I'm sure that's true, you know, and I don't want to say that there's nobody out there that's like that. I'm sure are players that are like that. But if we're talking about the overall majority of people, most players are not such good defenders as far as like picking people's pocket that they're going to come down and get like 5, 6, 7 steals just from picking the other team's pocket, you know, unless it's just like a really, really poor team you're playing against. Most of the time, it's going to be like you said, they played good defense. Now that guy's throwing a cross-court pass because he's panicked, and now you get a steal off of that. Rather than, oh, I lunged 30 times and I got 4 steals. Look, I'm a good defender. Well, no, you actually gave up, you know, someone going by you 26 times. But nobody puts that on the highlight tape, right? They're only going to put the steals on there. So I just think just keep that in mind, that misconception that, yeah, you know, steals equals great defense. Sometimes, yes, but not always. So any last misconceptions before we head out of here?
I guess I'll put this out there, although a lot of people will probably get mad at this, but the last misconception I can think of is that, and you hear it all the time, is that defense wins championships. I don't think that's the case. I think I think the reason that saying even came around is because so many teams just don't play defense, and so everyone starts saying, "Hey, defense wins championships." I think it's part of it, but I think it's all about that offensive game to me, man.
I think there's a baseline level. I'm not going to agree with you 100%, but I get where you're coming from. I do think there's a baseline level of defense you need to have if you want to be like a championship level team, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the best defensive team every year to win, you know, because like you said, if you're the best defensive team, but you have really poor offense, like you're not going to win many games. So I do agree to an extent, but I still think you have to have, and you know, every level, whether you're high school, college, NBA, every level has its own baseline, and it probably varies from year to year and where you're playing. But if you're not at that level, then yeah, I agree. I think you can't win without that defense. But at the same time, you know, there's just, like you said, this misconception that you have to be the best defensive team every time in the state to win. And it's like, well, not necessarily, but you should preach and still teach good defense, you know?
Yeah, and I think that you do have to have good defense in order to win a championship, but it's just like you need both sides of the ball. They're equal.
Yeah, you can't win it by itself. You know, at the end of the day, the only way to win the game is by scoring points. You know, when people, I know, well, people talk about different stats. I was thinking about this earlier. People talk about different stats like rebounding, points, assists, you know, all this different stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, the most important stat is points, because that's how you actually score and win. You know, if you get 10,000 rebounds, but you don't score any points off of them, then they're meaningless rebounds. So, yeah, I kind of agree with you there. Okay, well, let's wrap this one up then. Thank you guys so much for watching. You know, we really appreciate you guys listening or watching in here on YouTube. If you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. We do come out with a new episode once a week, and we hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace.